There are fates in history worse than death itself, punishments so deliberate, so calculated in their cruelty, that they were designed not merely to end a life but to erase it completely from existence. In ancient Rome, beneath the marble temples and triumphal arches, there existed a darkness that the empire worked tirelessly to conceal. This is the story of a woman whose name was deliberately forgotten, whose crime was whispered but never spoken aloud, and whose punishment was so horrifying that even Rome, a civilization that celebrated gladiatorial bloodshed and public executions, chose to carry it out in absolute silence. What you're about to hear is not a tale of battlefield glory or political intrigue. This is something far more intimate, far more terrifying. This is about how an empire controlled its women through fear, and what happened to those who dared, or were accused of daring, to step beyond the invisible chains that bound them. Rome presented itself to the world as the pinnacle of civilization, a beacon of law, order, and reason that would lay the foundations for the modern West. But for every triumph celebrated in the Forum, for every speech delivered in the Senate, there existed a parallel world of suffocating control. Roman women, particularly those of noble birth, lived lives that appeared gilded with privilege. They wore fine silks, walked through marble villas, and were attended by servants who catered to their every need. Yet this appearance of luxury masked a profound powerlessness. From birth to death, a Roman woman's existence belonged not to herself but to the men who governed her life. First her father, then her husband, and in some cases even her sons held authority over her choices, her body, and her future. She could not vote, could not hold office, could not own property without male oversight, and could not defend herself in court without permission from her guardian. The legal concept that defined her existence was brutal in its simplicity. Patria potestas, the absolute power of the father, granted men near total control over their households, including the right to punish, exile, or in extreme circumstances, even kill those under their authority. A woman's worth was measured not by her intelligence or character but by her obedience, her fertility, and above all, her chastity. For in Rome, a woman's body was never truly her own. It was a vessel for her family's honor, a guarantee of legitimate heirs, and a symbol of the moral order that held the empire together. To violate that sacred boundary, or to be accused of violating it, was to threaten the very foundations of Roman society. And when that threat emerged, the punishment would be swift, merciless, and designed to serve as a warning that would echo through generations. The woman at the center of our story was not a criminal mastermind or a revolutionary. She was a noblewoman of respected lineage, connected to one of Rome's prominent families. Her days were spent within the confines expected of her station, managing her household, maintaining appearances, and embodying the virtues that Roman society demanded of its women. Yet, despite her careful adherence to the rules that governed her existence, she found herself ensnared in an accusation that would seal her fate. The charge was adultery, a crime that in Rome carried weight far beyond personal betrayal. An accusation of infidelity was not simply a matter of family shame. It was a political weapon, capable of destroying alliances, delegitimizing heirs, and toppling the carefully constructed power structures of noble families. Her alleged lover, according to the whispers that spread through Rome's elite circles, was connected to a rival faction, one opposed to her family's interests and ambitions. Whether the affair had actually occurred was almost irrelevant. The accusation itself, once spoken, became truth in the eyes of those who stood to gain from her downfall. There would be no real investigation, no genuine pursuit of evidence, no attempt to uncover what had truly transpired. The trial that followed was a performance, a theatrical display of justice designed to restore honor to her family name while simultaneously destroying the woman who had supposedly tarnished it. She stood before men who had already decided her guilt, men whose power depended not on fairness but on the appearance of moral authority. Her voice, if she was permitted to speak at all, carried no weight against the testimony of those who accused her. And so, with cold precision and the veneer of legality, they condemned her to a fate that Rome reserved for those it deemed beyond redemption, a punishment so terrible that even speaking of it directly was considered improper, so horrifying that it could only be carried out in secrecy, hidden away from the eyes of the public who might question its necessity. The sentence had been delivered, and there would be no appeal, no mercy, and no escape from what was to come. The punishment Rome chose for her was not designed to be quick. It was not meant to be merciful. What awaited her was a fate that stripped away not only life but dignity, identity, and memory itself. The Romans called it viva sepultura, live burial, a sentence reserved for those whose crimes were considered too shameful to punish in the light of day. It was the method used for Vestal virgins who broke their sacred vows, a punishment cloaked in religious ritual to disguise its fundamental cruelty. The logic was as twisted as it was deliberate. Roman law declared that the blood of such women could not be shed by the state, for to do so would anger the gods and bring misfortune upon the empire. So instead, they would be placed in an underground chamber, given a small portion of bread, a jug of water, and a single lamp. Then the entrance would be sealed with stone and earth, and the state could claim with a straight face that it had not killed her. She had simply been left to the will of the divine. But there was no mercy in this fiction. The chamber was a tomb, and everyone involved knew it. The food provided was never enough to sustain life for more than a day or two. The water would run out even faster. The lamp would burn until its oil was exhausted, and then she would be plunged into total, suffocating darkness. Alone, buried beneath the streets where Rome's citizens walked and conducted their daily business, she would wait as the air grew thinner and her strength faded. The cruelty was not merely in the method but in the intent behind it. To execute her publicly would have given her a story, perhaps even sympathy from those who witnessed her final moments. To bury her alive in secret ensured that she would vanish without a trace, leaving behind no grave to visit, no marker to remember her by, no way for future generations to know she had ever existed. Imagine, if you can, the terror of those final hours. The sound of stones being dragged across the entrance, sealing away the last sliver of light from the world above. The realization that no one was coming to save her, that her cries would go unheard, that she had been abandoned not just to death but to oblivion. The flickering lamp would cast shadows on the walls, shadows that danced and twisted until the flame finally died and left her in absolute blackness. Time would lose all meaning in that void. Minutes would feel like hours. Hours would stretch into what must have felt like eternity. And through it all, she would know that Rome had decided she was not worthy of existence, that her life mattered so little it could be erased as easily as wiping ink from a page. Her death achieved exactly what Rome intended. Though her name was struck from records, though no official account detailed her final moments, the story spread through whispers and silences. Every woman in Rome understood what had happened, even if they dared not speak of it openly. Mothers warned their daughters without naming names. Wives moved more carefully through their households, knowing that a single accusation, true or false, could lead them to the same fate. The punishment became a ghost that haunted Roman womanhood, an invisible threat that reinforced obedience more effectively than any law or decree ever could. The empire did not need to issue proclamations about proper behavior. The fear of that sealed chamber, of being buried alive while Rome carried on above as if nothing had happened, was warning enough. This was not the first time Rome had used such methods, nor would it be the last. Each case was wrapped in ritual and secrecy, each victim erased with the same methodical precision. The state maintained its facade of virtue and justice while wielding cruelty as a tool of control. And the women of Rome, no matter how noble their birth or how carefully they adhered to every rule imposed upon them, lived with the knowledge that safety was an illusion. One whisper, one rumor, one political maneuver by enemies they might never even know they had, could condemn them to darkness. In the end, her story survived not because Rome wanted it remembered but because fear has a way of echoing through time. The empire that buried her believed it could erase her completely. But instead it created a legacy that reveals the true face of its so-called civilization. Behind the marble and the triumphs, behind the speeches about virtue and honor, there existed a machinery of control that operated through terror. Her punishment was meant to be her ending, but it became something else entirely. It became proof that Rome's greatest monuments were built not just on the backs of slaves and conquered peoples, but on the silence of women who had no choice but to submit or vanish. The glory of Rome endures in ruins in history books, but so too does the memory of what it cost. So too does the shadow of that sealed chamber, and the woman who died alone in the dark, buried beneath an empire that chose cruelty over mercy, control over justice, and silence over truth.